Hello.
Hi there.
Welcome, Derek, Soren, and Porter. My first question to you is, did you hear everything that Hiroe and I talked about right before?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Then I guess, Hiroe, we don't need to admit everybody else because everybody can hear what we say.
Yeah, so this is a webinar, so this probably people can hear us. So I'm just gonna explain. I think this is a Zoom webinar. So everybody who signed in as an attendee will be able to hear what panelists are saying, what we are doing on the video, but the panelists will be able to speak and also share their screens. So as we take turns, I will manage that on the back end to promote presenters to do the panelist. And once a group is done, we'll rotate.
Okay. So now that I know that everybody can hear us, welcome. My name is Mathias Vogel. I'm the moderator, one of the moderators for this panel. I am also the instructor for the Global Engagement Academic Residential Community. The panelists who are speaking today are all in the Global Engagement Academic Community. Our panel is called It's a Small World After All. It's called that because all the projects that we hear today are dealing with issues of global reach. That is what our ARC examined throughout the year. Global reach, but of importance and effect to us locally as well. We are here in this research symposium that had to go online in a hurry. But I think I would like to thank all of our panelists in advance and all of our first undergraduate research symposium producers for all their work that they have undertaken to put everything online. But we are here to celebrate our presenters' work. It's the culmination. We're at the end of their first year, at the end of the year of their research projects. This is the culmination, what they're presenting to you today. I would ask all the panelists to be, and all the attendees to be respectful to each others and to the presenters as you're asking questions or as you're listening. All non-presenters and guests, I know we have several guests today, some other students as well as friends of the presenters and some of their professors, and also we have family members here. So I would like to welcome you all to this panel. Please make sure that you are muted and we don't accidentally have overspill, voice overspill, or noise overspill. And for questions, please type the questions in the chat. Hiroe Sorter from Undergraduate Studies is my partner in the panel hosting and moderating, and Hiroe will collect all the questions, and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. I will, just as a word to the presenters, I will give you a verbal cue at 4 minutes. And then at 5 minutes, okay? At which time I will introduce the next, at which time you'll just have to wrap it up. And after that, I will introduce the next panelists, the next presenters. I will try to keep that as brief as possible. I would like for the panelists to give us an overview of their project, basically their abstract, their research questions, and then after that, it's all you. Where you take us is yours. Then after we have completed all the presentations, we'll come back to the Q&A session. okay? With that, I would like to give it over to Derek Evans and Porter Wheeler and Soren Scheu. I pronounce Scheu in the German and Northern European way, since I am from the German and Scandinavian department originally. But Derek is a sociology major, Porter is a poli-science major, and so is Soren. So welcome to the three of you. And I hear your project is on neoliberalism.
Oh yeah, all right. Porter, you wanna take us away here?
Sure. Just before we begin, I'd like to give a brief roadmap to everybody listening about what we're going to be talking about for our project itself. In brief overterms, we are talking about neoliberalism in Chile and how it relates to specifically the protests that started happening around October of last year. You may have heard about this, but how the culmination of those protests have been a catalyst to the failures of the neoliberalism system within Chile. So for a roadmap, what we're going to go through. First, we're going to talk about in terms of our poster, our abstract, our hypothesis, then talk about what methods we used and different calculations and what we looked at to like prove our points for this. And then talking about what really ignited all of these, what started the protests, and into the conclusion of what we gained from our project. Derek, if you want to hit us with the abstract.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Derek Evans, and I'll be introducing the abstract, which is we want to research the effects, both positive and negative, of a neoliberal system on kind of the origin country of the system itself, Chile. And we wanted to look at it through three different lenses, which is why we all decided to work together. I'm a sociology major, so I was looking at the social theory behind it. Porter is an international studies major, so he was looking at the globalism scale of it. And Soren is a political science major, meaning that he was able to look at the political science that went into the establishment and the current state of Chile. We want to first look at it through a collection of resources that looked at socioeconomic equity. We want to define what neoliberalism is and how it came about and what it's done to Chile over time. So I will let it go on to the next person.
So our research and methods really focused on comparing data. So we compiled data from the World Bank, OECD, and a whole bunch of different online sources. And we compiled this data and we compared, what we saw. And we have some, if we were standing in front of our poster board, we have some excellent graphs, but you'll just have to imagine. And we were looking at the GDP and the concentrations of wealth, education levels, as well as some past history and the current current events that are happening in Chile with a lot of protests. Well, I say current events, this is happening in 2019, which sounds like years and years in the past compared to 2020. But so that was a lot of our research focus.
And before you take it on, a brief interruption. You are panelists, so you can share your PDF with us.
Okay, wonderful. I will do that. All right, so hopefully this is more helpful. We have the actual poster in front of us here. But I want to briefly go back to talking about what we've gained from all of this research and our main, which leads us back to our main hypothesis, really, of comparing the dichotomy of neoliberalism in Chile. Because in one hand, you have the large economic growth that was gained, yes, by Chile during it. They came out as a large economic partner in terms of global world trade, in terms of imports and exports. But there's also the other side that we wanted to look at, about the human factor to it. Because yes, there has been large economic growth within this country and large economic growth for it on the global scale in terms of global markets, but there's also been massive problems for it in terms of its societal factor and its for its normal civilians. For that, just living in Chile is very expensive. It's the most privatized state in the entire world for everything from school to water. All of these things combined to the fact of like, it's very, very hard for the average person to have any type of social mobility within Chile itself. So the crux of this entire project is trying to balance the both sides of neoliberalism. Yes, the economic growth that it can garner, sure, but also the human factor and also the humanitarian crises it can wrought, and also the spillover of that effect. Which is what ignited the protests. And the protests were what, of course, caused us to want to do this project. And to briefly go over what happened and why we feel this is so important to talk about, and to really hammer in my point about the humanitarian failures of the neoliberal system in Chile, was that back in October, the government, in its most recent policy, raised the metro fare by 30 pesos. And 30 pesos is not a large amount of money, but this was the thing that broke the camel's back. This was the spillover effect that made a lot of people angry, especially working class people in Chile that are just trying to get by and have been beaten down over decades and decades of neoliberal policy that has hurt their social standing and their ability for any type of wealth accumulation. And because of this, it's ignited within the protests. And that's something that is still going on today in some other type of fashion.
And I believe that leads us on to our conclusion, which I'll be talking about that in the three aspects I was talking about in the beginning with our abstract, which is what I learned and what I was able to conclude from social theory and sociology context, as well as what Porter and Soren were able to conclude and come to find in their respective fields. So when looking at it from sociological context, we are focusing a lot on social stratification and the social effects of having an entire community, an entire country identify as consumers before they identify as nearly anything else. And under neoliberalism, most people are not in control of production. They are not in control of where wealth goes. They are simply in charge of buying into that wealth. They are consumers in nature, and with how privatized most industry is, that's really the only option they have unless they have a leg up in being wealthy from the very beginning or coming from a family that owns one of those private companies. And that's kind of the consumer effect. And the social stratification is it separates into two different groups in society. There's the consumer, there's the producer. The consumer continues to lose out on money, they continue to lose out on opportunity, whereas the producer continues to gain wealth and gain more power. When looking at it through a political science view or lens, you can see a very clear struggle between power and people, where neoliberalism was originally put in place under a dictatorship military where there was very little say in how people wanted the government to function. There was very little say in how they wanted it to look. And it entirely came to the conclusion that the rich ended up in power and the people have never really had an opportunity to go against that. That's what they were born into, that's what they were raised into, and that's what they continue to live in. And when looking at from political science stance, there's not a whole lot you can do there aside from completely revolt or just wait until you can hopefully vote for people that want a change. But generally the people that run for positions in Chile, considering that they vote people into office, are the people that have that power. They're the people that have that money. And then looking at it from an international studies perspective and through that lens, it's a lot of, if it's in one place, if it's in Chile, it has to be elsewhere. Neoliberalism focuses a lot on globalism and the function of a global market where you want lower prices and you want higher export and you want everything to be able to be as smooth and functioning as possible. And that is where neoliberalism thrives. That's where people really lose out on profits, the consumers, but producers gain a lot because they're the people doing all the trading, whereas the consumer doesn't really see any of that. And that kind of just feeds into a global market where nothing can really change because it's so set in stone. And that's all I have for conclusions. And I just want to thank all of you for taking time to listen to our presentation and give us the time to talk to you about neoliberalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for going first. Our next presenters are Evelyn Wu and Tina Chan. They're flagship students from the Chinese flagship program at the U of O. And Evelyn is a psychology major, and Tina is a East Asian languages and literatures Chinese major. And they are, Hiroe, can you make Evelyn and Tina presenters?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm trying to move the panelists back to attendees. So just a moment.
The suspense.
The suspense, that's right. I'll just repeat while we're waiting that if you have questions, please type them in the chat so that we can collect them for Q&A afterwards. And there is Tina. Hello, Tina. And Evelyn.
Hi.
Hello. And you may have heard earlier, since you are presenters, you can, since you are panelists in our presentation, in our panel, you can upload your PDF.
Okay. I can share my screen.
Mm-hmm. That's right. There you go.
Okay. So our project was on preserving the authenticity of Chinese New Year and seeing how through generations from the 1960s to the modern time today, how the celebration customs and trends have changed. And so the purpose was to explore the changes and the generational gaps that are happening between the younger generation and the older generation, as the younger generation increasingly changes to more like technology-driven methods of celebrating the Chinese New Year, while the older generation sees how the younger generation is like, in a way, like splitting further from tradition and the different attitudes and the conflicts that this is creating. And so for this research, we used like Western and Chinese news outlets, since Tina and I both study Chinese and we're really interested in like learning about Chinese culture. We try to use like a variety of sources, like the social media blog posts and news and different websites. And we wanted to see how Chinese society is either like diverging and how cultural changes are made because of modernization. Tina, do you want to talk about the 1960s?
Yeah, sure. So I'll be exploring like the 20th century. The 20th century, like the things that they used to do, like the from the 1960s to 1980s, especially like every.
Hiroe, what happened? We've lost Tina.
Did Tina just drop out?
All of a sudden, we have lost our feed to Tina. So we have Evelyn.
Oh, she's back.
She's here.
There she is. Okay. Yes. So these to everybody, these things may happen, but just come back into the room as Tina just did, and you should be fine.
I'm back. I'm so sorry. I just got cut off. Yeah, so I was going to say that I was going to do like, I'm going to talk about the 1960s to 1980s and then the generational highlights of them. So into detail, we highlighted some of the things that we do every 10 years. So in the 1960s, the government decorations and rations. And then in the 1970s, the return of entertainment and the use of money. And then the 1980s is the variety of New Year foods and first Spring Festival Gala, as well as the 1990s, the buying of food and the travel rush. So I'm going to talk about that in detail. So some of the things that they usually did was, so during the government decorations and rations, they kind of like cleaned up the streets and then like kind of like put up portraits of Chairman Mao, and then red couplets with hope of good harvest. And then the Chinese government also gave every family a special New Year like coupon, which like could get food, because like they usually used back in the 1960s, they used to like trade with they usually got food in China with like this kind of like coupon to exchange like food. So in the New Year's Day, you actually get like extra coupons. And then there was also like the buying of new clothes, which was like a tradition, and then that you could not usually get in like state-owned markets. And then the biggest dinner of the year, or biggest meal of the year, would be like the New Year's Eve dinner, where people gathered in canteens in the 1960s. And then during the 1970s, there was like the return of entertainment and the use of money. So the windows, like at homes, people usually decorated their windows with like red paper cutouts of like couplets and Chairman Mao's poems. And then the New Year's Eve meals usually consisted of like dumplings, which contain like pork and veggies. And then the celebratory dinner, they usually listen to radio broadcast and also like lion dances, dragon dances, and silk walking returned. Usually you can see this in like later on in 21st century as well, but then that's when it actually began to like become popular again. And then there was also the giving of money to like children. So usually elders give like this red envelopes, that we called, to like children, which consisted of like 0.5 yuan, which is like not that much now, but then it was quite a lot back then. And then 1980s was like how like the variety of food like kind of like just appeared and got more. And then these were like ranged from like pork, chicken, fish, vegetables, rice cakes, and then many more rare appearances. So then there was like a huge range of like food varieties in the 1980s, other than just like dumplings from before. And then also extended families could, and then other sources of entertainment included television. So people bought like black and white TVs, and they watched the first Spring Festival Gala, which aired in 1983. Also in the 1980s was
Evelyn, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You can have 30 more seconds.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, and then the last thing I would like to add is like the 1990s travel rush, which is like super popular when people moved from like places to places because of the huge like when people like moved from other places. Yeah, sorry. Go on, Evelyn. I'm sorry.
I'll just quickly highlight the 21st century trends. So a lot of them are like technology driven, like online shopping and virtual red envelopes. So Chinese people often use this messaging app to send virtual red envelopes instead, which could be seen as a little bit more impersonal, but also very convenient. So these are like some changes that have been made. And pretty much the conclusion that we reached was that these cultural traditions are not lost, but we can interpret them as simply changed, and old customs still remain for people who want to celebrate them. So they can still be preserved with like efforts, as like dragon dancing and stilts walking is returning to, and people can participate in these traditions along with the new modern ones. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have a question for later. I will just type it in the chat also.
Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And thank you for the nice poster as well. So now if you stop sharing your screen,
Okay.
we can have the next presenters. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
John Los is our next presenter, as Hiroe is bringing John up on the screen. There he is with a nice background in your palace.
You know it.
John is presenting today. He has worked on a project together with Garret Sims, and that is on the economic crash and breakdown in the Venezuelan economy. Garret has class right now, and John is presenting for both of them. So.
Yeah.
John, again, 4 to 5 minutes. I will be rude and interrupt as I did with Tina and Evelyn.
Perfect. Let me know. I do tend to ramble, so feel free to step in. So Garret and I are both political science majors. I'm also double majoring in sociology, and we both have minors in Spanish. So we thought, hey, let's look at an intersection of all three of those areas, right? We've got the sociological concept of scarcity, right? As democracy breaks down and financial things break down, people begin to, have more scarcity in their lives, and that can cause political changes, as we saw in Venezuela with Hugo Chavez and his transition from democracy to dictatorship. And then we thought, hey, a 2008 financial crisis, that's perfect. So our project highlights the policies adopted by the Venezuelan government during and after the 2008 financial crisis and the ensuing breakdown of democracy. So to really get a handle on this, we have to go before the 2008 crisis, though. Kind of like with Derek and Porter's presentation, the 2008 financial crisis was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. It was a very large straw, but it was still the final thing that cut it out.
John, we have a question, whether you could speak a little louder.
Oh,
and or maybe closer to the mic. Yep.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, I've been having some trouble with my mic. I'll just speak into it like a microphone. So we have to go before the actual 2008 financial crisis. In that Hugo Chavez, he kind of began like some other dictators in that he rose through the ranks without any pomp behind his name. He didn't come from the Palace of Versailles, the kings of France did. He instead came as a junior military leader and a failed coup leader when he first entered the government. He really didn't signify anything much, but as anybody that has watched politics before knows, that isn't always the case once they get a taste of power. So we have some quotes here from the book How Democracies Die. That was one of our large resources that we used. We also read Venezuelan newspapers, and we kind of translated that over into English as best we could for little tidbits of information what they are reporting. We also looked at reports from the State Department for more information about the economics of things and how the United States is viewing this. And we also just looked at international reports by NGOs to try to get a really good look at it. So the conclusions that we came to is that as a country experiences economic strife, it opens the door for governmental policies that otherwise wouldn't have been considered acceptable. So in Venezuela's case, Hugo Chavez, he used the 2008 financial crisis, and as the economic situation was going down, he then put his foot in the door of authoritarianism. As you see here in the key findings tab, in the year following the 2008 economic crisis, he clamped down his authoritarian control over the banks. Now this says that he threatened to nationalize. However, he then nationalized it shortly thereafter. And he did a similar thing as to what we're seeing in the United States, where the reality being projected by the executive wing isn't exactly reality. And so the banks weren't violating any laws that were on the books. However, Hugo Chavez created laws so that he could then persecute them and take control. Now, it's a little scary to be watching something like this, where as economic strife is happening, a leader that has shown dictatorial tensions then takes that, because we're seeing similar things here in the United States, where as investigators are investigating the president, he then fires them, and we're all in this weird economic thing, and it's, I don't know, the alarm bells are kind of starting to go off in my head. But Chavez wasn't the only one that plunged Venezuela out of democracy. His successor, Nicolas Maduro, also, he took Chavez's beginnings and he really ramped it up to 11. He really started to wage a war on outside influences in Venezuela. So any form of outside influence to, propagate the economic situation, any kind of foreign aid, that was denied. It was considered an attack on Venezuelan sovereignty, and thus was considered unacceptable by Maduro's standards. So he really just created this world where Venezuela is it, and any kind of outside influence is bad. And the problem with that is that as countries are seeing the manipulation of the Venezuelan people, they want to step in and say, hey, you can't create the situation where your citizens are, your dictatorial subjects, right? But Maduro says any kind of influence is not allowed. Now, unfortunately, Maduro has kind of taken away democracy almost completely. There was recently an election in Venezuela, and the results are being disputed because Maduro stepped in, he put his finger on the scale a little bit. And in a 2019 report for the human rights, there has been over 7,500 instances of extrajudicial killings. So if you spoke up against the government, probably weren't going to get seen again by your family. Our final conclusions: as Venezuela's economy experienced greater economic strife and created more instability, the government then took over greater actions that they phased as economic sanctions, when in reality were just eroding the rules of democracy to further their dictatorial gains. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And you were also in time.
For once.
All right. Our next presenter is Jay Taylor. Jay is a student who is now looking at public policy planning and management. He has an interest in Korea, and his presentation is examining the extent, contributing factors, and responses to depression and suicidal ideation in South Korea. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Mathias. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. You guys don't have to feel like you have to absorb that. That's a lot of writing, and I will not read it all. I promise I will not go over the time. All right.
Yeah, you can zoom in to particular areas that you would like to highlight. So
can y'all see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So my main topic of inquiry. Oh. Apologies. I'm just going to screen share like that. My main topic of inquiry is the extent, contributing factors, and responses to depression and suicidal ideation in modern South Korea. For some background, the Republic of Korea, Hiroe referred to as Korea, is a relatively wealthy country with the 11th highest GDP in the world. However, at the same time, it's also currently beset by a very severe mental health crisis. It has the highest suicide rate in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of other fairly high GDP countries, and also the highest suicide rate in the region it's located in, the Southeast Asian region. In addition to these problems, it does also have issues of depression, alcohol dependency, and mood disorders, which all correlate to suicidal ideation. My research essentially attempts to address three questions on a fairly summative level. One, to what extent is South Korea experiencing a health crisis? Two, what factors contribute to this crisis? And three, what solutions and or policies have been proposed or implemented to address this crisis? To begin, Korea has a very high rate of suicide. It's the #1 cause of death for the age groups of 10 to 39, second for the age groups of 40 to 59, and fairly high for the age group of 60 to 69 as well. Overall, it's the 5th highest cause of death in the population. Compared to the US, which has a suicide rate of about 14 per capita as of 2018, Korea has about 27 per capita as of the same year, almost double. Surprisingly, Korea actually has lower diagnoses of both depression and mood disorders in general than European countries such as the US and other European countries, and even other countries in its local region. What's interesting about this is that despite having lower diagnoses of a lot of mental illnesses that correlate to suicidal ideation, it still has shockingly high levels of it. So this up here is a, let's go with brief, list of correlation factors to suicidal ideation, or factors that correlate to something else as specified, which in turn correlate to suicide in on an individual level or in a population. Our original project, when I worked with a larger group, focused on these 5 areas: general, students, full-time employees, celebrities, and the elderly. And so in my project, I continued to address these 5 areas. A brief overview of these factors. In general, Korea does have a very high level of alcohol dependency, and that correlates to depression, which in turn correlates to suicidal ideation. Students in Korea have a very high levels of studying, especially compared to US students, and this in turn correlates to higher levels of stress. It can also cause familial issues. Full-time employees have long working hours. In fact, for every 11 months worked by an American citizen, a Korean citizen on average works a whole month more, 12 months. This causes a lot of job-related stress and job-related depression, which in turn causes suicidal ideation. As far as celebrities go, I addressed both what caused suicide in celebrities and how celebrity suicides impacted the public sphere. There's a lot of online bullying and harassment that happens in Korea that causes celebrities to kill themselves, particularly female ones. There's a lot of older traditional standards that affect them. It has a very small factor on the overall level of suicide in the population, but a consistent one. Lastly, elderly have a fairly high level of suicide. They actually have the highest number of deaths caused by suicide out of any other age group. However, they also do have higher rates of social networks that are lacking, so less people to talk to, less people to interact with, and lower tend to be in the poverty line. In fact, about half of the population above 55 in Korea is below the poverty line. Sorry. To conclude, Korea since 1995 has been collecting a plethora of mental health data on various mental illnesses. Only very recently, though, has Korea made a concerted effort to actually improve its mental health system. One of the biggest issues is that both residents and legislators tend to agree that suicide is an individual, not societal issue or environmental issue. As a result, until people see a need to address suicide as a problem, people will not make a strong push to change it legislatively. One big important push towards this was actually in the 2019 year, a law passed limiting the Korean work week from 68 hours maximum to 52. Overall, the best thing the Korean government could do to minimize such a thing, at least according to studies I've read, would be to increase public education among so-called gatekeepers, individuals who are trusted in the community, teachers, medical personnel, institutional personnel, clergy, and so on, in how to identify, recognize, and intervene on mental health issues. Thank you very much, and I would like to appreciate Mathias for his support through this whole process.
Thank you, Jay. And you did keep your promise. You were within the 5 minutes. I was just ready to hold up my sign 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Our next presenter, Hiroe, if you could help me with Kira Veselka, if you could make her the next panelist. Kira looked at the outbreak of disease, at perspectives on the interaction between narratives of fear and public policy. Kira is a business administration major, at least according to my class list. So.
Yeah, if you want the full list, it's business administration, international studies, and German.
And German. That's good to hear. All right, Kira, take it away.
Okay, I apologize first about my camera. I'm not at my normal computer, so I don't have my camera available, but I can share my screen very quickly. I don't know if you see that.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, so hi, my name is Kira Veselka, and my presentation is on the outbreak of disease and perspectives on the interactions between narratives of fear and public policy. Let's start out with my abstract. With many modern viruses and bacteria becoming increasingly more deadly, specifically with the recent outbreak of COVID-19, how countries react to disease outbreaks becomes more crucial than ever. In our presentation, I looked at a lot of viruses, including the Spanish flu and flu epidemics or flu outbreaks each year. But with the outbreak of COVID, it seemed more poignant to focus on the thing that is affecting us right now. COVID-19, better known as the coronavirus, is the current global pandemic infecting over 4.5 million people. But it was just announced today that we have reached over 5 million people. And it currently, as of the moment that I submitted this PDF, it had over 307,000 deaths and growing. The current source of the virus is still unconfirmed, but many state officials and the main public believes that the source of the infection came from a rare meat market or wild meat market located in Wuhan, China. There's also another theory that these animals that were infected came from a nearby Chinese testing center after they had escaped. And the Chinese testing center, their main focus was experimenting with the SARS virus and other strains of COVID or the corona before the current one. And that's where the current pandemic that we're facing came from. Since the major outbreak in China, many countries have had to react quickly to prevent further outbreaks within their own countries. Some measures have worked, such as South Korea's mandatory testing, curbing the virus at its source. Meanwhile, countries like Iran have had severe setbacks regarding the virus, as the people of Iran have very little trust in their government and its ability to adequately protect them, which in the end has led to a massive jump in deaths and overall infection within the country. We also can look at countries like Italy. Italy's government did a pretty good job of trying to control the virus initially. However, because of their high number of elderly population, they were not able to effectively control the virus at its source. And as a result, they have seen numbers much like Iran. Something about the virus specifically, COVID-19 is an upper respiratory disease which causes symptoms such as fever, cough, and shortness of breath. As a result, this disease can spread very rapidly from person to person, posing a very high risk of infection to anyone within the vicinity. There is, however, a wide range of severity when considering the coronavirus, and we now know that there are a variety of strains. The current number of strains is not known, though, because we're seeing so many different types of symptoms, and it seems to not really matter what age or how healthy you are. You can be the healthiest person on the planet, and you can still become infected and have a risk of death. However, the vast majority of people who contract COVID will only experience mild symptoms. They describe it as a really bad flu and recover with some assistance from medical professionals. However, as people progress into the more severe stages of the disease, people with compromised immune systems, such as pregnant women and older people, face the risk of death as the coronavirus weakens the immune system, further allowing the significantly deadly disease to enter the body. So that was just a little bit on the virus itself and what it's done. But the main focus of my research was on the fear and the racism that has been created because of this virus, specifically relating to the public policy and what the world leaders have done in reaction to the virus. Specifically, I focused on China, Germany, and the United States. Because examining and evaluating public policy in news media, we can find that large-scale outbreaks can affect people's perspective on the perceived other. In this case, the other is referring to Asian Americans or people of Asian descent. There has been a large number of people who have begun referring to this virus not as the coronavirus or as COVID-19, but simply as the Chinese virus, putting the blame on people of Chinese descent. Another name for it is the yellow virus. And really, those names come out of a racist belief that in my research, I also saw that a similar belief came out of when the Spanish flu was prevalent in the, oh crap, it's flipping me. When the Spanish flu was prevalent, people used the name the Spanish flu as a way to create fear and panic against people of Latina descent. So the coronavirus is being used in a very similar way. From opinion pieces by The Guardian, New York Times, and The Washington Post, we've seen hundreds of videos and hundreds of stories from Chinese Americans being kicked off of public transportation to French headlines calling the virus the new yellow peril. It's kind of the jarring truth of our society right now is everybody is so scared of this perceived virus that they're putting the blame on a group of people that cannot control or have no control over a virus. But I think it also brings to light a lot of the issues that are in our public policy as they do nothing to prevent this type of fear and this type of response within the public. Instead, they spur it on and place the blame onto one group of people. Thank you. Mathias, you're muted.
Thank you, Kira. A very current topic, I said, of course, very unfortunately so, but thank you. Our next presenter, Hiroe, is Mariam Moghadami. And Mariam is a cinema studies major. So, I think, Mariam, you are double majoring in cinema studies. I only have your cinema studies major down, but you can introduce yourself.
Mariam, if you're here, would you put in the chat box? I don't see your name listed on the attendees list.
If Mariam is not here for now, we will skip to the next presenter, and that is Calvin Parker Durost and Caitlin Yost. And while Hiroe is making both of them presenters, I will just say that Mariam's project focused on the influence of Russia on its on the former Soviet republics and beyond. And her presentation is also online on the Undergraduate Research Symposium YouTube channel. So it can also be screened or viewed there. Now for Calvin and Caitlin, we have Caitlin as a pre-international studies major and Calvin as a pre-business administration major. And they looked at a very interesting topic also, the Yakuza in Japan. And their question was, why are they still there? So Caitlin and Calvin, the stage is yours.
Okay. So for this project, we decided to look into an important mafia organization in Japan referred to as the Yakuza. We mainly looked into historical documents, police reports, articles, and first-hand accounts and with dealings with the Yakuza as part of our research. We made this project in order to educate and bring awareness to people in Yakuza organizations and how they are able to be such a huge influence in Japan to this day and where it could lead their involvement into the future of the country. First, we went over the history just to give people more of a background on it, where like most people believe they have ties and descend from two of the lowest social classes of what was left of the samurai groups after they disbanded during the Tokugawa era. And the word Yakuza in itself means generally like good for nothing. So that kind of gives you a view of like how the Japanese people first viewed Yakuzas. Lots of Yakuza were gamblers, and they were the ones that started the tradition of getting large, colorful back tattoos as seen in modern Yakuza. And that's one of the reasons why Japan's kind of iffy on tattoos as a society. And they have a family-sensitive organization, kind of like the Italian mafia, in the sense that the oyabun, which is the boss, is seen as the father, and below him are the kobun, which are prodigies or child status. For one of our research questions, we looked into what are the Yakuza doing now, which since 2011, the government has started to crack down on Yakuza businesses, and they aren't allowed to operate as freely as they once were. Like for an example, they used to have signs outside their businesses letting people know who they are, like the Yakuza organization name itself, but now they aren't allowed to do that anymore just due to the crackdowns. And they've started to do more international work involving drugs and guns rather than trying to do extortion money. And it's still really hard for police to this day to catch them doing illegal work due to the Yakuza being so underground, and due to the fact that also being in the Yakuza organization isn't technically illegal. It's only the illegal acts that they do in the Yakuza group that's considered illegal.
Yeah, so that kind of leads us into why the Yakuza are still around. And lots of people feel that the Yakuza are like a, quote, necessary evil. Some view them as like a Robin Hood figure due to their historic roots and their ability to do jobs that no one else wants to do. For instance, they helped out recently with the Fukushima nuclear incident and provide workers for dangerous jobs that otherwise no one would have taken. So that kind of boosts their reputation among the public. In fact, according to the National Police Agency of Japan, 63% of people still support their activity as of 2018. So for a while, Yakuza have been seen as almost a good thing for the country. Many people believe that the massive organization of the Yakuza deters smaller, disorganized petty crime from happening. They believe that organized crime is a lot easier to control than, smaller petty crime. So that kind of leads us to our last research question of like, how long are they going to be around? And like the amount of Yakuza are dwindling, and it appears like they might be on their last legs, down from their peak in 1960 with 184,000 members. As of 2018, they only have about 30,000 current members. They're actually like having to almost fire their members because they can no longer financially support them anymore. Yeah, and thanks in large part to crackdowns by the Japanese government and people's attitudes towards the Yakuza changing, their numbers are just slowly decreasing. The traditional Yakuza that has been around for almost 200 years might be disappearing, but they're being replaced by international criminals and organizations. The main worry really for the future is that when the traditional Japanese Yakuza disappear, more petty criminals will come onto the scene and, you know, commit crimes that previously didn't happen because they were, caught up in being part of this big Yakuza organization that kind of did stuff, under their semi-legal ideas. So yeah, that's our presentation. Mathias, your mic is muted again.
Thank you very much, Calvin and Caitlin, for this presentation. And our next presenters are Sydney Warren and Sarah Harvey. And Sydney and Sarah, it's really only coincidence that we have Calvin and Caitlin and Sydney and Sarah. But our next presenter, Sydney, is an undeclared student as of yet, exploring. And Sarah is a political science major. Their project focused on human trafficking in Haiti. Welcome, Sydney and Sarah.
Hi. I'm not sure why my thing isn't working. I'm not sure why my camera's not working, but I can share my screen right now.
Yeah, if you just share your screen, that we can follow along, that would be nice.
All right. So for our project, we focused on human trafficking and slavery, but we renamed it Modern Day Slavery in Haiti because that's what a lot of the developers and researchers who focus on this topic call it. And so Sydney, you want to take it away with the abstract?
Yeah, so I'll just be going over our abstract really quickly. So basically our research project examined the many factors contributing to human trafficking in the nation of Haiti, where thousands are affected by human trafficking every year. For our project, we seek to expose the main developments and causes for the Haitian sex and labor trafficking market by reviewing and compiling government data reports by international non-governmental organizations and individual case studies over the past decades. And we will show the Haitian government has not taken significant action to hold traffickers accountable or to eradicate the rest of its system, which we'll get into later. Our project aims to bring widespread public attention to the violations of basic human rights in developing and often ignored countries like Haiti, and we hope to shine a spotlight onto human trafficking in an effort to gain support for the movement. You may be asking, what is human trafficking? It can be defined as any form of recruitment, movement, or targeting of persons with the goal of exploitation in mind through the use of deception or violence to encourage cooperation.
And human trafficking in itself implies that there's some kind of forced action, whether that be making the victim do labor or whether they're being sexually assaulted. And oftentimes children, women, and those in poverty and who are uneducated are more susceptible just because they don't have the resources to reach out and help themselves. And moving on, so within Haiti, this problem is exacerbated by the rest of its system, which actually means to stay with in its French meaning, but is often is misleading because this system is a place where abuse and exploitation occur. Children are humiliated and often subjected to a gateway into sexual exploitation and further physical harm. As you can see by our graphics right here, from Restovic Freedom, a lot of the children in Haiti are subjected to this, and it was created out of Haiti's start as a slave rebellion in order for the country to gain financial stability, especially for the parents who give their children up into this system.
Another incident that should be taken into account is the UN Peacekeeper Incident, which was basically some United Nations peacekeepers were allegedly being involved in a sexual exploitation ring within Haiti's borders. The mission statement, according to the UN Peacekeeping Department of Peacekeepers, is that today's multidimensional peacekeeping operations are called upon not only to maintain peace and security, but also to protect civilians, protect and promote human rights, and assist in restoring the rule of law. Although this mission statement is clear, it obviously didn't hold true in Haiti, and the UN actually did very little in addressing the issue, and it didn't even convict the peacekeepers involved. In fact, all of the peacekeepers managed to avoid incarceration. Since then, the allegations, the UN has pulled the peacekeepers from Haiti, but the sex trafficking issue still exists. So now there's sex trafficking and the peacekeepers aren't there to help with their civil rights issues. The influence of these peacekeepers ultimately did not help the nation and arguably made the situation worse.
In addition to the UN Peacekeeper Incident, the 2010 earthquake that occurred in Haiti also worsened the problem of sex trafficking within Haiti, just because it created a state of instability, and it created a system of organ harvesting, where people go and take organs from either dead or injured people. And in addition to this, children in the country were taken and sold abroad under the pretense of adoption, and were subjected to create almost worse than the restavek system. And although the country tried to have help for this, they didn't want to have any questions to their sovereignty. And so a lot of the aid that came to the country was through NGOs, but because of this, there wasn't a lot of stability, and there was only so much financial contribution that could occur. So there's still a lot of instability within the country that needs to be addressed concerning this issue. And on that note, we'd just like to thank Mathias for his help, and that is the end of our presentation. Mathias, you're muted again.
I guess I'm slow to learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sarah, yeah.
Thank you.
Our next presenters are Jamie Arpon and Natalie Padilla. And Hiroe are Jamie and Natalie here. Yes, there's Jamie. Welcome to Jamie and welcome to Natalie. Hi. Jamie is an Asian Studies major, and Natalie is a Computer Information Science major. And their project is looking at lolicon in Japan, and they will tell us what lolicon is. So with that, I'll give it over to you, and I'll mute myself again.
Okay. We'll just start with the screen share. Okay, so we decided to focus on a form of hypersexualization known as lolicon, where lolicon is the attraction to prepubescent girls, mainly within anime and manga. Our methods were mostly through personal interviews and through looking through academic research papers, although we had a little bit of a hard time due to most of the research being in Japanese due to not much interest in this topic abroad. Natalie, why don't you start with the history?
Okay, yeah, so basically, Lolita as a concept became more mainstream in 1955 after a novel titled Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov came out, and it was depicting a middle-aged man's kind of dark obsession with a young underage girl. And then in Japan in the 70s, it became more popular because there was a lot of fan art and of different anime or manga where artists would draw female characters as underage girls instead of their more like grown-up selves. And then again in 1979, there was a film by Hayao Miyazaki called Lupin III, Castle of Cagliostro, where the main protagonist's love interest is a young underage girl, even though that the protagonist is well in his 20s, almost 30s.
So like over the years, it's gotten like even more prominent within Japanese society. So much so that you can see in convenience stores, just on like magazine racks, there will be content with lolicon in it, depicting young girls in sexual ways. There have been multiple cases in courts arguing to ban it, which a lot of the arguments include like that it leads to sexual abuse of children, it's harmful to children who read it, and like it's technically outlawed by Japanese child pornography laws, but those laws are really like sketchy and have a lot of loopholes in them. It's all been like a lot of people won't like prosecute against it because it's such a big economic factor within the economy, and where a lot of money comes into the country through lolicon. And additionally, there is the argument that if they limit lolicon, it's a gateway to limiting other like freedom of expressions. And like such an art, there's sometimes nudity expression in that, so they don't want that to be shut down. There's also some more minor arguments that it's a less harmful proxy for child abusers, and that it can educate children on sexual matters, although neither of those have been proven correct.
There are also like many excuses as to why it should be depicted in manga and anime. One of them is called the immortal excuse, where a protagonist could be 1,000 years old, like vampire, but have the appearance of a young underage girl. For an example, there is one anime called Jensen the Vampire Bund, where the protagonist is a 1,000-year-old vampire, but she chooses to take the form of like a 10-year-old girl in order not to be married. But even though we see in this anime that she wears very inappropriate outfits with the body of a 10-year-old girl. Yeah, so that's just one of the excuses that people have to keep depicting this in popular media.
A lot of people like also wonder how it became like why people have this fixation on like lolicon within Japan. And one professor that we looked at his own personal interview, he did a self-examination of why he had sexual fantasies about young girl growing up and still does. And he talked about how the lack of sex education in Japan and the lack of talking about puberty in general made him really like uncomfortable with like his own transformation, as he said it. And he had like this fixation on the idea of another girl who was also experiencing puberty. And he acknowledges that it's wrong, but it's also a very disturbing description of his own fixation. Additionally, there is a beauty standard in Japan where youth is beauty. Girls will get surgery to have crooked teeth to like hone cuteness and youth. And models will usually aren't promoted or accepted once they're like past 16. Like there'll be famous models, but usually if you're a low standard model, you won't be promoted past the age of 16.
So yeah, there's a lot of like lolicon is definitely affecting Japan's youth mostly and how they perceive women and kind of the ideology that they need to stay young. But yeah, thank you for listening to our presentation. Mathias, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. Yes. Our next presenters are Emily Harris, and I don't know if Katie was able to join us. Is Emily here, Hiroe? Emily and Katie.
Sorry, yes, Emily's here.
Emily and Katie have a presentation on what they call the White Satan Complex, a very catchy title. Katie is a Family and Human Services major, and Emily is a Marine Biology major. They focus on a very interesting topic that many of us will be familiar with, and that is going quote unquote south of the border to help build houses and support social services. So they show us a different perspective. There's Emily.
Hi.
Is Katie in attendance?
I don't think Katie made it, no.
Okay.
Okay. I think, can I start?
Yes, you can start. Absolutely.
Okay, sorry. So our project was on the white savior complex, actually, which we did a play. Well, Katie came up with it. It was a play on words of the words white Satan complex. So basically, what we focused on was the idea, one, of the white savior complex, which is the idea that started all the way back when colonizers came to places like Latin America and even North America, and used their advancements in technology such as weaponry and diseases to establish a dominance over the natives of those lands. So it kind of permeated throughout the years after it had continued for hundreds and hundreds of years, to this idea that third world countries, meaning like Latin American countries or African countries, need European people or leaders or their help in order to advance themselves. So what we mainly focused on was Latin America, specifically El Salvador. And one instance was the fact that a couple years ago, they had this huge hurricane that came through and devastated the entire country. And what had happened is it had wiped out like food resources, housing, and killed some people, which was terrible, and it had ruined the economy. So what had happened is a lot of North American mission trips had gone down to help rebuild housing, bring supplies and everything, which ended up doing more harm than good, because these mission trips that went down actually took away jobs from El Salvadorians who could have rebuilt what was ruined. And within that hiring of the El Salvadorians, you could have also put more money into helping the economy. So with the sending of mission trips and the volunteers down there, they were building houses that were much more expensive than the ones they were used to, and ruining the economy by taking away jobs that El Salvadorians could have used to bring money back into the economy. And in addition to that, we also focused on nonprofit organizations that also aid in this idea. One in particular is the Save the Children organization, which is a child sponsorship agency. And because they're a nonprofit organization, all of the financial goings-ons are public knowledge. So what had happened a couple years ago was a man was sponsoring a child in, I believe it was Syria. And one of the reporters he had found out was going over there, he asked her to investigate and see how the kid was doing, because he had been sponsoring them for 10 years. So when she investigated the agency and the child, it had turned out that the child had been dead for 4 years, but he had gotten no notification. So what had happened is there was a deeper investigation into the organization in which they found that the money that is donated to the organization is then pooled into one giant kind of pot almost of money, and then it is divvied out to each village, not family. So what happens when the villages get the money is they use it how they see fit, and it does not directly go to the children who truly need it. But on top of that, as you can see from the screenshot we have here of Davy, the children on the website who you choose to sponsor are displayed in almost the same way as you would see a dog for adoption on a pound website. And a lot of the children whose pictures were taken for the website were either taken non-consensually, either by the family or the child themselves, or they were taken without the proper background given to the family. So in conclusion, for us, we recommend that you research organizations that you're donating to before putting in money, and just donate things such as material goods, food, water, non-perishables, things that would help and cannot be distorted in some way, shape, or form. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Katie, even though she's not here. And while you, when you were presenting in our internal poster symposium, there's something interesting that we discovered, and that is my family and I, we have been supporting a child, and that very same picture that you pulled up is a picture that is known to us as supposedly the picture of another child that we are sponsoring. So quite some interesting research that you did. Thank you. Our next presenter is Jennifer Jensen. Is Jennifer here? Jennifer? I see one hand up. Hiroe, can you find, there's Jennifer, yes. All right, welcome Jennifer. Jennifer is also a pre-international studies major, and her project is focusing on the hair trade in Southeast Asia. Jennifer, it's all yours. You're muted as of yet.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you go.
Okay. All right, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay, so my name is Jennifer, and my project, let me full screen it. My project is called The Hair Trade's Dirty Secret, or How the Hair Industry Marginalizes East Asian Women. I am going to be specifically talking about human hair extensions and wigs that people in the West tend to buy. So if you're up to date with any pop culture, you'll know that celebrities like Kylie Jenner and Jeffree Star and Sia, they're always promoting and talking about their new fancy wigs that are expensive and they're beautiful. These wigs come in a variety of textures, lengths, and colors, and they're very expensive. With all these celebrities promoting these new wigs, they're kind of becoming a new trend that's becoming popular amongst youth nowadays. However, what a lot of people don't know is where the human hair that's being used in these wigs is coming from. Most people will assume that it's coming from donations, because sometimes we see on TV how a person in the West will grow their hair out with the intention to donate it to a factory. However, this isn't the case for a majority of the human hair that's used in these hair extensions and wigs. And it's also important to point out that this is an issue that does happen globally, but I will be focusing on it specifically in Southern and Southeastern Asia, because this is where the women tend to be most taken advantage of compared to the other regions in the world where this issue does happen. So a little bit of background knowledge, there's a few different grades of hair that's used in these human hair extensions and wigs. The lowest grade is called comb hair, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is dead hair that is collected from women on the streets from their hairbrushes. It is bought for pennies a piece, and it is then shipped to detangling factories in China, India, or Bangladesh, where women workers can spend upwards of 80 hours detangling a single clump of hair. This is very time extensive and tedious work, because if you've ever tried to detangle hair, it's really hard. These women often work in pretty poor conditions and don't get paid adequately enough for the hard work that they do. For the middle grade of hairs, there's a few other ways that it can be obtained. One common way is in India, as part of a religious practice, women will shave off their hair and donate it to a religious temple, either as showing a devotion to their religion or as a donation to the temple. However, this isn't completely consensual all the time, because there have been cases of husbands forcing their wives and children to donate their hair. Recently, there's also been cases of women in India and Myanmar being mugged for their hair. Specifically in India, it can get quite brutal, as women have talked about being beaten on the streets and having their homes broken into in order for the muggers to shave their hair off. In Myanmar, it is less violent. It's more of a pickpocketing action, where a woman will be going about her day-to-day routine, and out of nowhere, a pickpocket will come up with a pair of scissors and cut her hair off, and she has zero say in it and what happens to it. So the highest grade of human hair is called Remy hair, which is what you see on the celebrities and in the news a lot. And it is, it's virgin, unbleached, untouched human hair that most often comes from people who are living in poverty in Southern and Southeastern Asia. Typically, it comes from these women because they don't have access to the expensive and fancy hair treatments that those of us in the West do. So their hair can get grown out really long, and it is very strong and healthy. Typically, what a buyer will do is they will approach these women and they will pay them as little as $1 for their hair, which that hair can then, after it's been done treated and sent off to the West, it can be sold for upwards of $4,000. So these women that are selling their hair aren't seeing any of the profit. Quite literally, they're being taken advantage of and exploited because they're living in poverty and they're poor. It's also important to note that in a lot of these countries, hair is culturally significant to these women. A lot of times women will forgo other basic necessities in order to care for their hair. So when they decide to sell it, it isn't done out of just the want to sell it, it's done out of desperation. The hair is often the last resource these women have, and they have no other choice but to sell it to try to support themselves and their families. Now, the other question is, are there any ethical solutions to this? And yes, there are. There have been a few pioneers in the West that are trying to increase the standards in the hair industry. One notable figure would be Dan Choi, who runs a company called Remy New York. He sells very high-end luxury hair in the West, specifically from New York City. He himself focuses in Vietnam, and he goes into these rural communities where women are living in poverty, and he sells, or he buys their hair for between $90 and $450. This is money that can quite literally change lives. It can help bring women out of poverty, it can pay off medical bills, and it can send them to schools. So in this case, he is trying to adequately compensate them for the sacrifice they are giving him by selling their hair. And I would say my biggest takeaway for this is, if you are someone who is looking into investing into human hair extensions or human hair wigs, because they are quite beautiful, and the act of buying this hair isn't unethical in and of itself, I would suggest that you pay close attention to where that hair is being sourced from. If a company that you're looking into has very inconsistent information on where they're sourcing from, or can't give you a solid answer, I would say avoid it. And even if it costs more money, it's better to buy that hair with the knowledge that you're supporting and these poor women, as opposed to just supporting the system of exploitation that continues to go on. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Yes. The next presentation we have is by a group, Edwin Guerrero, Emma Ziari, and Eloise Navarro. And they were looking at, by the way, Edwin is a religious studies major, Emma pre-international studies, and so is Eloise. And they were looking at how foot traffic in around Machu Picchu affects the lives of indigenous people. And here they are to tell us about it. Welcome.
Hello.
Oh, I'll
Hi.
share my screen. Okay. Okay. Can you, is it working?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Edwin, do you want to start us off?
Okay, sure. I wasn't waiting for a segue or something. Anyways, so our group looked at the impact of tourism and how it affects Machu Picchu in Peru. And our research question was, how does the legislation of foot traffic in Machu Picchu affect the economic livelihood of indigenous groups in Peru? And so what we looked at was ecotourism and just how negatively it affects both the indigenous community and the environment at the site.
Yeah, so that's basically the introduction in general. We'll go into more specifics about everything that he said, but I'll start off with a little bit about the history or the background, which is actually quite important in this case. So Machu Picchu wasn't really a popular destination or tourist attraction at all before the 1940s, and it wasn't until Theodore Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy of the US that it started to gain popularity. And this was because it was a time where we were increasing our diplomatic relationship with Latin America. And what we've learned here is that basically if the US is ever involved with any other country internationally, it should always be questioned, as you will see later in our presentation, because this wasn't really like diplomatic intentions. It was mainly just to benefit the US and ended up leading to lots of the consequences that Emma is going to talk about.
Yeah, so really quick, my headphones might die, so I might have to like reconnect in the middle while I'm speaking. But so with tourism in Machu Picchu, there are a lot of environmental and cultural impacts with the high volume of visitors per year. A buildup of trash and physical erosion of the site. There's about 2,500 people who visit per year. And so the buildup of trash and the physical erosion is having really deep impacts. And that's, you know, just an example, those two. So then there are the ecological impacts. Two examples are the disappearance of the Andean condor, which we put a picture of there. And then also a rare orchid species. We don't have a picture of that, but and there's also a lot of cultural implications, which is, you know, impacting the sacredness of the site. Obviously, this is a sacred site for the Quechua or the Incan people, and so it's a threat to the Quechua language, and also with the high costs of associated with visiting Machu Picchu, the descendants of the Incan people and also locals can't even visit because the prices of touring the site is geared towards more international tourists. So it makes it virtually inaccessible for locals and descendants to visit.
Yeah, so basically to conclude, as we've seen, this tourism has negatively impacted Machu Picchu, and especially the indigenous community who, like Emma said, can't even enjoy their own sacred sites. And no amount of ecotourism can alleviate that. The only solution would be to completely tourism altogether. However, that doesn't seem to be like a logistical option due to tourism being such an important part of their economy. And we can compare this to something called the tragedy of commons, which is where people act on their own self-interest and against the good of all individuals and the environment. So just like this side, we can see that although we know of the negative effects, we still continue to go and, you know, add to the problem. And we've kind of decided that it's ultimately up to the government and, you know, these agencies to apply laws and rules and regulations to minimize the damage that we do as much as possible.
Yeah, and based off of, actually really quick, I want to say it's actually 2,500 people per day. That can easily get mixed up, but so it's thousands of people, it's a lot. And so that kind of speaks to how much erosion you can imagine is happening on the site itself. And yeah, based off of the conclusion that Edwin was just talking about, we came up with some ideas or thoughts or steps about moving forward from this point. So firstly, environmental education. We think this is extremely important. So this isn't just like a singular issue. It's not on one entity. Governments, tourism agencies, everyone has to come together. And then obviously effective government policy. And most importantly, to wrap it up, because we're running out of time, is giving voices to Indigenous groups and communities. These communities have thousands of years of knowledge. So we need to start listening to them, because clearly they are doing something right, yet they are the most impacted communities. So thank you everyone for listening, and yeah.
Thank you very much to all three of you, Emma, Elle, and Edwin. We have our next presenter, and that is Gabe Tsui, who is a pre-journalism major. Is Gabe here, Hiroe? There is Gabe. And Gabe's project looked at the United Arab Emirates, and a very also intriguing project on looked at tourism and liquor control and other vices, supposedly. There you go. Gabe, all yours.
All right, thank you so much, Mathias. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone right now, so I won't be able to share my screen share my project at all. I apologize. My mic on my laptop is broken. But anyway, my project, I wanted to sort of see how the restriction of certain vices and certain information and substances in the UAE and in the Middle East as a whole is sort of connected to tourism specifically, because in Dubai they were really pressing for increasing tourism in the area. A lot there were a lot of business trips over there, and I sort of wanted to know a little bit more about what was going on there. And so essentially what I wanted to know was how tourism was working as a sort of a force of liberalization in the UAE and the Middle East. And what I ended up finding was that tourism did in fact allow for some of those sort of social and cultural taboos coming from sort of the religion that's dominant in the area of Islam, of course. Sort of how tourism was sort of pushing back against those taboos, specifically for the tourists and people that were not native born to the area. So if you were a tourist, you had greater access to alcohol, and very specifically, they did not crack down quite as hard on certain relationship sort of laws. So in the Middle East, if you're a Muslim, you're not allowed to sort of have contact, or so much contact with your significant other if you're not married at all. And of course, if you're a homosexual, of course they look down upon that as well. But if you're a tourist, as long as you don't say that you are as long as you don't say that you're unmarried, you're allowed to sleep in the same room. It's only when you say that you are that it becomes an issue. But these rights are not extended to sort of the citizens of the area. In addition, alcohol is not as heavily enforced with tourists, but if you are a citizen, natural born, it's required that you get a paid license. So that access is only for people that have sort of money, the higher class typically. As far as information censorship goes, there's a significant amount of censorship of government criticism, especially. There are a few cases like where there were journalists who were executed or were sort of disappeared essentially out of the region that were trying to report on certain issues. And there was a very specific case like the UAE 5, which it's more than 5 people, but it was a group of people who were sort of cool, who were who were criticizing the government and were trying to come up with a social movement that would sort of move away from some of the archaic things regarding some of the worker rights issues that were going on of workers not being paid, and especially workers from other countries not being paid their fair share or with inhumane working conditions. Let's see. In addition, there's a lot of censorship of pornographic material, and I know that doesn't sound terribly important, but it sort of extends into that sense that there's that censorship of physical displays of affection, especially in public, where you're not allowed to be with your significant other, even in public if you're alone most of the time. And so there's a lot of censorship of displays of love, essentially, and affection. In addition, of course, drugs, alcohol are pretty much banned to the point where, as far as opium is concerned, or opiates, poppy seeds, even for culinary use, are banned. So they really do try to pressure and eliminate as much of that as possible. As far as like my conclusions on everything, I don't think that tourism is a real force for like any sort of social empowerment or social evolution. I think that tourism is mostly just a way for the government or to essentially make taxes off of tourists or to profit off of tourists essentially, and to sort of keep the economy going, especially with the fluctuation of oil prices particularly. It's the way that they can sort of float their economy. In addition, just from my personal readings and somewhat experience as well, there's a lot of disenchantment with the West in the Middle East. And so you can't have real social evolution coming from elsewhere. It has to come from inside the country. And with so much censorship, especially like of the government criticism and so many people just having their voices silenced, I don't really think that, I don't have high hopes for further liberalization, especially coming from tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabe, also. And our last guest, our last presenter, I did not see in our attendance list, and that is Kate Moores. Is Kate here? If Kate is not here with us, then we could move to the Q&A part of our presentation. We have a few minutes left, and now is the time when probably that you've been all waiting for to ask a few questions. If there are no questions, I have a few questions that I could ask, but I want to leave the stage to attendees and panelists to ask questions. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat so that Hiroe and I can see it and ask our presenters. In absence of any further questions to our panelists, rather than me personally asking my own questions, which I can do when I see our students again, I would like to thank everybody for presenting. We have had quite a number of attendees. Number has gone down a little bit now towards the end, but I know that several other students were here, and that we had guests from outside of the university in attendance as well. So congratulations to all of you. I'm very proud that you made it this far, that you presented of your projects. They were super interesting. I have enjoyed getting to know more research in the areas that you were researching, whether it was Latin America, the Arabian world, Asia, or the Caribbean, or Germany, or Europe. And I wish you a good evening then at this point, and all the best. And I will see you next week. Many of you, as you are class members of the Global Engagement ARC. For now, are there any last comments or questions?
Mathias, you're muted.
So thank you also to Hiroe for your support of our panel.
It looks like Holly is raising her hand, so I'm gonna have her talk.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. So I just wanted to ask the students, and I guess anybody can answer this question, but how has it been presenting in Zoom as opposed to presenting in person? Has this affected your presentations? Has this made it more intimidating? Has it made it easier? What does the students say about that?
And Gabe's raising his hand, so I'm gonna allow him to talk.
Personally, I am not a fan of presenting on in Zoom. You lose a lot of that human contact where you sort of having somebody in front of you just makes it so much easier to talk to somebody, I guess, as far as that social aspect. I mean, yeah, I have the image of Mathias staring me into my soul somewhat, but I feel like for me, speaking to somebody and sort of getting them to sort of connect with the project, that human connection really helps. And I think that's kind of absent in a Zoom presentation.
Thank you, Gabe. And who else had the hand up?
I'd also like to comment that it's been harder to do research as well in preparing for the symposium. Me and my group, we were very communicative and we had a lot of channels to talk, but it's still so much different doing this research many, many miles apart. And as far as the presentation goes, when we did our practice kind of presentation just with the ARC, it was, I had a lot more fun and I got to engage a lot more when I could physically see them presenting. And so I definitely also think we're missing a part of the research process as well as the presenting.
Thank you, Soren. Jennifer also made a contribution and she said it's less intimidating because I can't see the audience, but it also feels impersonal, like I'm not reaching anybody. I think those were the contributions. Hiroe, do you see anybody else raising their
No, I think that was all.
So thank you very much, everybody. I wish you a wonderful evening and nice checking in with you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hiroe, maybe we can hang just a few minutes if we stay on. There's one more guest remaining there. Okay, I'm going to unmute myself here regularly so I don't have to get it on my finger.
That was challenging.
Yes, thank you for your support. That was great.
I've never used this webinar function before, and I did not realize there was a difference.
I didn't either. I was, of course, Christabel clearly showed it, but I assumed that it was a regular Zoom meeting.
No, your students are amazing.
They were, yeah. I think they had good projects. But just from your end, did everything work smoothly?
Technical side is a little bit challenging, not knowing where to go to promote, going back and forth between the panelists and attendees, not having kind of the list of students in order. Mm-hmm. But thank you for your help. You've been very patient, and calling the name that helped. I can just find them on the list, and yeah, so that was great.
Yeah, I realized that you would need some time in between from my own Zoom meetings and teaching on Zoom throughout the term, and that we'd have to make some sort of transition. Pretty much almost everybody went longer, of course, and it is very. I didn't want to be too rude and just calling out, even though, so I don't know if it was visible or not, but I held up those signs.
I was able to see, but I think a lot of students might be looking at different parts of the screen, or maybe their notes, or so, virtually it might be harder to recognize.
Yeah. And I think for next time when we do this, it might be good to have an audio clue, like a ping when there's 4 minutes or 5 minutes.
Yeah, I do have some recommendations if this were to be online again. Having a weight room would be nice. So yeah, we had the time to discuss before everybody was in the room.
Yes, I didn't realize that everybody would hear us at the beginning.
Yeah, so when I logged in, I did not realize it was the webinar. I did not realize there wasn't a waiting room. Yes. So yeah, it was a little bit tricky at first, but because everybody, I think it was okay.
We did have outside guests.
That's true.
That I saw, but
there are some students that came up without their name, so that made it difficult when somebody wasn't here, or Jennifer, who raised the hand to say that's her, but so that was also a little bit challenging.
Yeah, and I'm glad we didn't say anything at the beginning that wasn't for outside ears. I think that is also, that's a consideration. I mean, there is some private chat that needs to go on between the presenters before.
Yes. And just so that this has been recorded and still recording. So as soon as one of us logged in, the recording was preset, so it started, which is good that I don't forget to do. So yeah.
Yeah, it's good, and the suggestions that we have then will also be recorded. So yeah, which is all. I think everybody has done a wonderful job doing this, moving this online in such a quick time frame, in a hurry, as I said at the very beginning. And for that, I think everything has worked just swimmingly. So thank you for your work, for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And your students' work are amazing. I'm going to go back, and hopefully the posters are already up on the website or somewhere that I can access so I can review them.
Yes, and I will send them a message now to congratulate them and to thank them.
Great. Well, thank you.
I will leave the meeting. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.